ice dams. With all the fun of a lot of snow and then warm temperatures, a lot of people got ice dams. So why do they happen and what can you do to prevent them? So the number one reason why they happen, honestly, it's bad insulation, and just the warm up kind of helped show that, right? And it's the snow melting, right? That's essentially what happens is all the heat from your house rises, obviously, and then goes in your attic, and then your snow starts melting. And you can tell, right? Not now, right? Because most of the snow is melted, but kind of look around and go in like neighborhoods where there's older houses, and you can tell what the houses with the worst installations are, right? Because you can see the icicles and the ice dams and all the crazy stuff happening because all the heat is escaping. And usually, you got your soffit, and your soffit, you don't have that heat coming up from the house, right? Because that's exposed to the air and it freezes right there. So it's kind of a fun experiment when you're driving around to be like, oh, that house has bad insulation. The house with all the snow on the roof usually has better insulation, right? Mostly when they're right next to each other, the sun shines on them the same way and all that stuff, right? So that's kind of why that happens, right? And what ends up happening, if you don't know, is ice forms, and as ice forms, as the rest of the water starts melting and cooling down, it pools where the ice is, and then it starts creeping up, right? Because it keeps pooling and pooling and pooling, and then it kind of essentially runs uphill, right? Because it's pooling, not because water runs uphill. And then it goes under your shingles, and then once it goes under your shingles, it keeps going and going and going, and usually hits like a nail or under the shingles, depending on how bad it is. And then it seeps inside the house, and then you get nice leaks, or you get icicles inside, or whatever crazy stuff happens, right? So that's kind of like how it forms and how it gets into the house. So, and there's barriers that the way roofs are done, there's ways to prevent it, but if there's so much snow and it's past those barriers, then you can still happen, right? Water always finds the path of least resistance, essentially. Right. So, also, from what I've noticed, is roofs with a less of a pitch usually have a bigger issue, right? Just because usually with more pitch, the water runs off faster and quicker than on ones that are more flat, right? So, what can you do? You can insulate better and make sure your gutters are clean and flowing well. But sometimes even if your gutters are flowing well and clean, if you have bad insulation, you're still going to have that issue, right? So number one is just have good insulation in your attic, and that's going to save you money on energy too, right? And you can buy one of those like blow-in insulation machines. It's kind of fun. You throw the little bucket things in there, the rectangular foam things in there, and then you got a big hose and you just like spray it all around, right? So it's kind of a fun thing to do. The other thing that is really important is the airflow, right? You can have all the insulation up there, but if you don't have the right airflow, that's going to hurt it. A lot of people do blow-in insulation, but they don't put the vents in between the rafters so the air can still flow, right? So that's super, super important. So next is make sure you're not losing any heat, right? So a lot of houses, they have, I don't know if you can tell, but they have like the can lights, right? With the light bulbs. A lot of those can lights, when these houses were built, they're not airtight, they're not anything. So you can actually have warm air escaping through there, right? Because technically, also those old can lights, you can't have insulation touching it because they're not fire proofed, or they don't have a certain rating, right? So those are some of the things you can do. And then I guess the last thing you can do also is to add in like the fancy, well, I don't want to call it fancy, but they make heating elements for the roof and for your gutters, which prevent that from happening. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully you didn't have to deal with ice dams because they're a pain. So I'll see you on the next one.